Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I'm Isabel Coleman. I'm a senior fellow here at the Council on Foreign Relations and director of the Civil Society Markets and Democracy Initiative. And it is with great pleasure that we welcome Hernando de Soto today to talk about, perhaps give a different angle on what is happening with the Arab uprisings and the Arab awakening, Arab Spring, whatever your terminology.
Now, we don't control all the processes because titling isn't just about titling. It's about how, you see, it's not really about the land. It's the land as a point, a reference point. And it's a long time ago that these land people took over the word property, and it's been rather difficult for the rest of the world. That isn't the way it started. You see, the whole idea is it's like your passport. There's a physical object, say you're the land, you have your passport, there's your photograph. Then there's your, I see it as I come to the States, there's your fingerprints. And then if you go through the passport, there's 1,000 filaments that link you to all sorts of other things. The general idea is to locate you so that you can be made accountable, you're responsible, and everything is verified and certified, and everything that's in there can be tested for the truth. It's a very complex process. In most of the rest of the world, titling is a little bit like when you walk into one of these restaurants, you hand your coat and you get your coat check. So you got a little piece of paper and your coat's in there. Or when I get my bag, I put it in Lima, I pick it up in New York, and that's a little property right that will last 24 hours or so. Or maybe you got it lost, they'll find it in Japan and come back to it. To make it last longer is a process that few people actually do, because even among your expert advice that you send from the States to developing countries, that's what you think it does, and that's as far as it should go. That wasn't the kind of things that Tom Jefferson was talking about when he said, if you give pieces of paper that don't actually lock the thing in such a way that it's respected and locked into other parts of society, you're going to be creating fictitious capital. And when you have fictitious capitals, he said, 1819, he had already been president, you will have recessions like the one we're having today. That's what he says. Now, here's another argument. If you're not careful about the continual validity of that piece of paper, like my credit card, you can trust it because it's got all sorts of things that wired it. When you can't trust it anymore, it goes out of fashion. Then, it doesn't matter how developed you are, the system stops working. So for example, all of these poor people in the United States that you gave subprime mortgages to, then they took that little piece of paper and took it one generation further and then securitized it, put it together, a credit debt obligation, then a little bit more than that. 16 generations later, it's in somewhere in the derivative system. Your Secretary of the Treasury, Hank Paulson, goes out and says, I'm going to get it. September 2008, I'm going to get this stuff out because it's toxic. He gets on his hands and knees in front of Nancy Pelosi and says, give me $780 billion because the guys who are holding the debt in Wall Street on those pieces of land all over the United States of poor people, we got to get it out because they're toxic. You see, it's the lack of credibility that spreads out. We got to pull it out surgically. She gives them $780 billion. I'm in, I don't know, Ethiopia, I'm watching this, I said, sounds reasonable to me, gee, what's this thing about derivatives? Look it up. Then, 3 weeks later, he says, well, you know, we decided we're not going to do that. What we decided is we're going to support the banks. Gordon Brown said it, it's much simpler, this, that, and the other. Now, I say, when somebody can't find something, that's my racket, which is about property rights and paper being somehow or other representative, not of the land, but of all the obligations tied to it. So I went in and started really researching this with a whole bunch of American associates and started finding out that the reason he withdrew was because he couldn't find the toxic assets. So all of a sudden, you Americans now are starting to find out what it means when the paper, I could come back to you and say, you know, titling doesn't work in your case either. It depends how it's done. But not only have you not been able to find out where it's at, and refused to because you could produce probably the biggest run on banks that the world history has ever seen, and you don't know where Greece is at fault because you don't know how much of this paper it's got. Or I know there's various types of derivatives, but you don't know. Nor Italy, which is, my God, is it France? Is it Spain? Is it Italy? What's going to go? You don't know, because it's not there. But now you're also finding out that to be able to liquefy all those assets, the subprime stuff, you started putting it through machines, and all of a sudden you've gone there to collect on these debts, having used a system called MERS, a certain type of software, and your courts have stopped you. And by paper, by law, you actually don't know who the banks nor the owners are of 60% of all your property that's been put into hock to get credit. Now, if you Americans can't learn that, what if you taught the Egyptians? Those are my critics. If you do it right, if you get a piece of paper that tells the truth, for which there are processes that were learned in the 19th century when capitalism faltered. And lots of people who didn't write books came in and said, how do you get a piece of paper to represent reality? Because I'm going to go global and I'm not going to be able to meet everybody. That's when you did your major revolution. It's undocumented. Your history books are poor. You still don't know why you won the war against Japan, but it's essentially because you titled the place. And because the Chinese followed up until you figure that one out, it's going to be hard to start criticizing us. Really very hard.